At 9:27 in the Strait of Hormuz, 40 Boghammar speedboats are 6 nautical miles out, closing at 45 knots, and each one carries enough 107mm rockets and bulk explosive to turn a $2 billion destroyer into a fire that cannot be put out at sea. If one boat reaches detonation range, the blast radius is measured in meters, but the consequence is measured in fleets, because a single mission kill on an Aegis ship tears a hole in the air defense for every hull behind it. If the shipping lane closes for even one day, the delay is not counted in news cycles, it is counted in millions of barrels that do not move, and in the hours it takes for a regional fight to become a global price shock. The wakes are already foaming, the range rings are collapsing, and the first armored launch hatches on the nearest American ship are just beginning to unlock. Before we dive in, comment where you are watching from and click subscribe. This is the kind of engagement where the difference between deterrence and catastrophe is a single timing call made before anyone has the luxury of certainty. Every person on those boats is close enough to see spray coming off another bow, and every person on the warships is close enough to watch the surface picture change one radar sweep at a time about every 2 seconds. The irreversible moment is not the first explosion, it is the first authorization to treat an approaching swarm as an attack in progress, because once that line is crossed, there is no rewind, only the physics of fragments, fuel, and flooding. What follows is a reconstruction built from publicly described tactics and known platform capabilities stitched into one continuous operational narrative, because the underlying mechanics are real, even when specific scenes are composite. At 9:27, the smallest detail that matters is heat. On a calm morning, an outboard engine throws a tight thermal signature, a bright knot of exhaust and friction that stands out against cooler seawater. If you look at how a millimeter wave radar sees the world, think of the radar in a modern car that can track vehicles in fog. It does not need a spotlight. It measures shape and motion by reflected energy, and it keeps working when glare and smoke make cameras useless. That same idea, scaled and hardened for weapons, is why the first response is not a warning shot. At 09:28, the American Surface Group shifts posture 32 minutes before the formal closure time. There is no open radio challenge, because a challenge consumes seconds, and seconds are already gone. The destroyer's Mark 41 vertical launching system goes from safe to cycling. A vertical launch cell is a sealed steel tube like a bank of pressure-rated thermoses embedded in the deck, each one holding a missile upright until the gas generator kicks it out and the main motor lights. The point is not drama. The point is tempo. Even when the missiles in those cells are designed for aircraft and crews, missiles, the act of launching establishes an umbrella that prevents a surprise anti-ship shot from reaching the ships that are now busy with small targets close in. The actual boat killing is done by the systems built for it. 2 MH-60R Seahawks, already airborne for surface surveillance, roll in low and fast. Each helicopter ripples AGM-114L longbow Hellfires in pairs. The longbow variant carries its own millimeter wave seeker, which means it does not require a laser designator to stay on target through spray, smoke, and evasive turns. If you look at the spacing in the swarm, you will notice the Iranian crews are doing what every small boat operator does when he expects hesitation. They are trying to force the defender to choose. 2 boats flank, several more drag behind to look like fishermen until they accelerate. The tactic relies on human doubt. The Hellfires remove that doubt in seconds. They do not explode like movie fireballs. They hit punch, and then the fuel and ammunition on the boat completes the destruction. A fiberglass hull fails differently than steel. It does not crumple. It delaminates, fragments, and disappears into burning debris that cannot support a body. As the helicopters engage, the USS Indianapolis, a Freedom-class littoral combat ship with a 57mm Mark 110 gun, comes up on the near side of the formation. The gun begins firing at a sustained rate, not the maximum rate, because sustained fire is how you keep the barrel within temperature limits while still delivering constant impact. 220 rounds per minute means 1 round every fraction of a second, a steady mechanical thump you feel through the deck. The ammunition is programmed for air burst. If you have ever seen a shotgun pattern spread as it travels, that is the simple analogy. The shell is set to detonate above a target, and the fragments spread downward in a cone. In the language of the report, it is a proximity-fused, pre-fragmented round optimized for small craft. The effect is crews shredded by tungsten and boats losing steering as control cables and exposed engines are cut. If you look at the waterline as the rounds walk across, you will notice why small boats are vulnerable. A planing hull is fast because it rides high. The same lift that makes it quick also makes it fragile. A few hits below the engine mount is enough to put it into a yaw it cannot correct at speed. At 0931, several boats try to break off, but the turn exposes their broadside. That is when the 57mm rounds do the most damage. The destroyer's 5-inch gun joins in when the range collapses inside its surface engagement envelope. The 5-inch is not rapid like the 57, it is heavy. Each shell is a fist of steel that arrives with enough energy to snap a small craft in half if it lands right. The gunfire control radar tracks the boats as points, but the operators are watching video as well because in literal water, clutter and false returns are not academic. They are what gets ships hit. By 0937, the surface picture is empty in the only way that matters. Targets are gone. Not dispersed, not slowed, gone. There are no rescue evolutions because you do not send boats into a potential minefield under missile threat and because the operational objective is to keep the lane clear, not to linger over burning slicks. The consequence of the early decision is immediate and physical. The blockade begins. Not at a scheduled hour, but at the moment hostile intent becomes hostile action. The larger operation is already underway behind that first clash. 158 warships is not a slogan. It is a logistics problem measured in fuel, food, flight hours, and spare parts. It is also a geometry problem. The entrance to the Persian Gulf is narrow enough that a coordinated mine-laying effort can force shipping into predictable lanes. Predictable lanes are where submarines and missiles win. Iran's fastest way to change the battle is not to sink a destroyer, it is to make the water itself dangerous. The mine named most often in open sources is the EM-52, a rocket-propelled rising mine designed to sit on the seabed and wait. A rising mine is like a spring-loaded mousetrap under a rug. It does not have to be in your path at the surface. It listens. It watches for the acoustic and magnetic signature of a large ship, then launches a warhead upward into the hull. In shallow water, that vertical attack is lethal because the bubble pulse reflects off the bottom and the surface, multiplying the stress on the ship's structure. To remove that threat, the fleet brings in the slow, ungainly aircraft built for one job. The MH-53E Sea Dragon is a heavy-lift helicopter with a towing winch and the power to drag a sled through seawater for hours. Behind it, the Mark 105 magnetic influence sweep looks simple, like a floating barge with cables, but it is an engineered source of electromagnetic signature. If you have ever watched a security tag trigger an alarm because it senses a field it thinks is a gate, you already understand the principle. The sweep pumps a controlled magnetic field into the water, forcing influence minds to think a large steel hull is passing overhead. If you look at the ocean behind the sled, you will notice the lane is not cleared by silence, it is cleared by violence. Mines detonate as designed, not against a ship, but against an artificial signature. Each detonation throws a column of water high enough to be seen from miles away. A geyser that can reach 200 feet, depending on depth and charge size. The contrast matters. A mine that would crack open a ship's keel is being spent on empty water, and that exchange rate is the point of mine countermeasures. Iran answers from the cliffs and launch sites inland. The Noor anti-ship missile, an Iranian-developed derivative of the Chinese C-802 family, lifts off and accelerates to high subsonic speed, roughly Mach 0.8 to 0.9, around 600 to 700 miles per hour. It comes down to a sea-skimming profile measured in tens of feet. Because the lower it flies, the later a ship's radar sees it over the curvature and clutter of the sea. Aegis is built for exactly that geometry. The AN-SPY-1 radar does not stare in one direction. It scans electronically, revisiting targets multiple times per second, building tracks even as the missile is still climbing out of the coastal terrain. If you look at the timeline, the critical window is the first minute. An anti-ship missile at that speed eats a mile every 5 seconds. The fleet cannot wait until it is visually obvious. The response is layered because single layers fail. The first interceptors are RIM-162 Evolved Sea Sparrow missiles. An ESSM is a compact, high-agility interceptor designed to pull extreme G-forces in the terminal phase. If you have ever yanked a car's steering wheel hard at highway speed and felt the tires protest, that is the civilian limit. An interceptor pulling 50 G is operating in a different physics. It changes direction violently to meet a target that is also maneuvering. If you look at the intercept point, you will notice it is as far from the ships as possible because debris at close range is still damage. The intercepts turn incoming missiles into expanding clouds of fragments and fuel, fireballs that fall into the sea before they can enter the inner defense zone. Anything that survives long enough to get close meets the last resort. The Phalanx Close-In Weapon System is not a gun in the normal sense. It is a radar-guided 6-barrel 20mm Gatling that throws a stream of tungsten at thousands of rounds per minute. The simplest analogy is a garden hose turned into metal. It does not pick one point. It fills a volume of air. The goal is not elegance. It is to force a kill before impact. By late morning, the surface and air fight is only half the story. While attention is fixed on Hormuz, a second problem is unfolding in water so deep the light never reaches the seabed. Undersea fiber optic cables carry the bulk of transatlantic data. 97% is the number often cited, and even if the exact percentage shifts by route and year, the dependency does not. Bank transfers, airline reservation systems, cloud services, and encrypted military traffic ride as pulses of light through strands of glass, no thicker than a garden hose, once armored, lying in trenches and on plain seabed across thousands of miles. The Russian move in this scenario is not a fleet battle, it is an attempt to touch the nervous system. The vessel associated with such work is Yantar, an oceanographic ship operated under the main directorate of deep-sea research, known by its Russian acronym GUJI. Yantar is a mothership for submersibles designed to go down to cable depth, locate a line with sonar and cameras, and manipulate it with tools. Alongside that, the undersea escort is described as an Akula-class nuclear-powered attack submarine, roughly 360 feet long, built to cross oceans quietly and threaten surface groups and submarines alike. If you look at why this matters, the answer is not romance. It is repair time. A cut cable is not fixed by software. It is fixed by a cable ship that must sail to a precise point, grapple the broken ends, haul them up from depth that can exceed 3,000 meters, splice them, test them, and lay them back down. That takes days in perfect weather and longer in the North Atlantic where storms and swell can halt work entirely. During that delay, traffic reroutes, bottlenecks form, and the systems that assume instant communication degrade into manual workarounds. Publicly, the alliance picture looks strained. Statements are made, commitments are questioned. That is normal at the political level and irrelevant at the tactical level because ships still sail, aircraft still fly, and sonar still listens. In the days leading up to the contact, deployments and redeployments are visible enough to suggest that the North Atlantic is being thinned as assets concentrate in the Middle East. The Russian assumption is simple. If the watchers leave, the cable routes become accessible at 1400 Zulu, about 200 nautical miles west of Ireland. The watchers are not gone. They are quiet. Emissions control, called MCON, means ships minimize active transmission so they are harder to locate by electronic surveillance. The analogy is a city blackout. The buildings are still there, the people are still moving, but the lights that give away position are off. The first trigger is the seabed, SOSUS. The sound surveillance system is best understood as a tripwire made of microphones bolted to the ocean floor. It does not see. It listens to low-frequency sound that travels far in deep water. When a large submarine crosses a monitored corridor, analysts look for a pattern that matches propulsion and machinery, not a single ping. When the contact is judged credible, the nearest P-8A Poseidon is vectored in. The P-8 is a jet aircraft with the range to loiter and the sensors to act as an ASW command node. It descends to a sonobuoy drop altitude and begins laying a field. The buoy types vary by mission, but the concept is consistent. A sonobuoy is a disposable sensor canister. It hits the water, deploys a small parachute or braking system on entry, then releases a hydrophone that sinks to a preset depth and transmits what it hears back to the aircraft. If you look at the pattern, you will notice the buoys are not dropped randomly. They form a grid with spacing measured in hundreds to thousands of yards depending on expected target speed and water conditions. The Poseidon drops a mixed field, passive buoys that listen for machinery and propulsor noise, and active buoys that emit pulses and listen for returns. Multi-static active sonar is the key concept. Think of one person clapping in a dark room while several others listen from different corners to locate where an echo came from. One source. Many receivers, it makes decoys less effective because the geometry exposes inconsistencies. Inside the Aquila, the first sensation is not impact, it is pressure in the ears and a change in routine. A high-powered active pulse, measured in the hundreds of decibels at the source, arrives as a sharp transient through the hull. The crew responds rationally. They increase speed to reposition, then dive. In this reconstruction, the boat drives down towards 1,600 feet, looking for a layer. The layer is the thermocline, a rapid temperature gradient where sound bends. If you have ever heard how your voice carries differently on a cold morning than on a hot afternoon, you already understand that air temperature changes the way sound travels. Water does the same thing, but more strongly. A thermocline can create a shadow zone where a sonar beam refracts away, leaving a blind region. If you look at the Allied response, you will notice they do not chase blindly downward. A British Type 23 frigate running on quiet propulsion streams its Type 2087 towed array sonar. A towed array is exactly what it sounds like, a long cable of hydrophones dragged behind the ship, far enough back to be isolated from the ship's own noise. The array can be used passively, listening, or actively, transmitting and listening. When it goes active, the ocean becomes a measured space and the Aquila's maneuvering room shrinks. The Russian boat deploys countermeasures. MG-74 Korund-type decoys are designed to imitate a submarine's acoustic signature and to confuse torpedo seekers. In passive sonar terms, they add extra contacts. In active terms, they add extra echoes. The purpose is not invisibility, it is doubt. The grid does not accept doubt for long. The Poseidon's operators shift to multi-static correlation. One buoy pings, others listen. Contacts that do not maintain consistent time delays and Doppler shifts across the field are rejected. If you look at what gets ignored, you will notice it is the decoys that appear to move in ways the water would not let a 12,000-ton hull move. The Aquila attempts to clear its baffles, the blind spot behind its own propulsor, where self-noise masks external sound by executing a high-speed turn. A baffle clear is standard practice. The problem is that speed creates noise. Noise makes you easier to track. The turn also consumes space, and space is what the net is designed to remove. A U.S. Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, USS Donald Cook in this narrative, closes to reinforce. Its SQQ-89 anti-submarine suite fuses hull sonar, towed array inputs, and offboard sensors through data links. 2 Norwegian Fridtjof Nansen-class frigates take flank positions, their own sonars contributing to a single recognized undersea picture. If you look at the speed readouts, the surface ships are moving at 20 to 30 knots when they need to reposition, fast enough to be tactically responsive, slow enough to keep their own noise from destroying their detection range. Once contact is held, the pressure becomes procedural. The Allied ships do not need to sink the submarine to win the objective. They need to prevent it from approaching the cables and from deploying submersibles. That means keeping it in a box. The box is defined by sonobuoy fields overhead, active sonar arcs from surface ships, and the hovering presence of an MH-60R using its AQS-22 dipping sonar. A dipping sonar is a sensor lowered on a cable into the water, like dropping a microphone into a swimming pool to hear what is beneath the surface while keeping the noisy helicopter above. Day after day, the Aquila is forced to choose between silence and mobility. If it slows to reduce noise, it loses the ability to break the perimeter. If it speeds up to move, it becomes louder and easier to hold. The Yantar remains outside the immediate engagement area because without the submarine clearing space, any attempt to work near a cable becomes a beacon, and beacons get intercepted. On the 19th day, the submarine comes shallow in daylight and then surfaces. In this reconstruction, it is not a theatrical surrender. It is a calculated admission that the mission is compromised, that remaining submerged under constant localization risks collision, entanglement, or escalation, and that surfacing under observation is safer than forcing a misinterpretation. The emergency blow throws white water and foam as ballast tanks vent. Aircraft orbit overhead, surface ships form an escort screen at a distance that signals control without inviting a close-quarters incident. Cameras record hull number and configuration. The message is technical, not rhetorical. The cable approach has been denied. Back in the Persian Gulf, denial is applied to a different threat. Iran's Kilo-class submarines, diesel-electric boats, optimized for quiet running on batteries, are at their most dangerous in shallow, noisy water. The nickname Black Hole exists because when these boats shut down and drift, passive sonar can struggle to distinguish them from background. But drift is also a constraint. Batteries are finite, oxygen is finite, time is finite. The coalition response is persistence. Rather than a single-shot P-8 aircraft maintain orbits, MH-60Rs dip and move. Surface ships run coordinated active sonar when the environment requires it, accepting that active transmissions reveal the hunter's presence in exchange for forcing the hunted to react. If you look at the water conditions, you will notice the Persian Gulf is not deep ocean. It is cluttered. It has high salinity gradients, heavy commercial traffic noise, and a bottom that reflects sound unpredictably. That makes perfect stealth harder for both sides. Electronic warfare plays a role, but not by jamming the water. When a submarine needs to communicate with shore, it must come shallow enough to raise a mast, transmit on HF, VHF, or satellite links, or trail an antenna at depth with limited bandwidth. Those moments create detectable emissions and vulnerabilities. The fleet's Sea-Whip-equipped ships, using the ANSLQ-32 V7 family of receivers and jammers, focus on intercepting and denying those above-water links when they appear, and on suppressing the radar and data links that would cue coastal missile batteries against the ASW screen. In the water, false targets come from a different toolbox. Expendable acoustic decoys, mobile simulators, and deliberate reverberation management make fire control solutions less stable. If you look at a sonar display in shallow water, you will notice how quickly it fills with returns from the bottom and surface. Add continuous maneuvering ships, helicopters dipping in and out, and dense commercial noise, and the number of track-like artifacts rises. The Iranian captains are forced into conservatism. Moving risks detection. Coming shallow risks interception and jamming. Firing blindly risks revealing position for an immediate counterattack. Several boats choose the safest option available in that environment. They bottom. A bottomed submarine is not dead, but it is restricted. It is sitting on the seafloor with minimal movement, trying to become a rock among rocks and hoping the hunter has to leave first. In the Persian Gulf, that can mean sitting in mud in water shallow enough that a helicopter's sonar can still reach it, and shallow enough that any emergency ascent risks surfacing inside a screen of hostile ships. The operational outcome returns to the same numbers that made the first minutes matter. The strait does not close because a declaration is read. It closes because the approach routes are cleared of mines and held under fire control. The speedboat swarm is destroyed before it reaches rocket range. The anti-ship missiles are intercepted far enough out. The debris falls into open water. The cable-cutting attempt in the Atlantic fails because the undersea escort cannot create space to work, and the work vessel cannot hide. Two separate theaters stay connected not by speeches, but by sensors that keep contact and crews that keep repeating the same procedures until the other side runs out of options. On one morning, 40 boats became burning slicks, and a bundle of seabed glass kept carrying the signals that move 97% of an ocean's data.